Hello and welcome to Software Testing from Scratch. My name is Richard Martin. This is Chapter 3, Video number 2, Approaches to Testing. Now, we've already covered 3 topics, so what's left is scenarios, checklists and charters. So, scenarios, also known as role-based use cases. Scenario testing is a software testing activity that uses scenarios, which is a hypothetical story, to help the tester work through a complex problem or test. The ideal scenario test is credible, complex, motivating, compelling, and also have a form of believability to it as well. And the outcome of that story is what has to be evaluated. These tests are usually different from step-driven test cases in that test cases are single steps, whereas scenarios cover multiple steps that have to be run in sequence to complete the story. Here's an example for one. A user logs onto the system with an unprivileged account, no admin access at all. He then tries to perform a search on application database X and export the result in a CSV format. The CSV will match the items displayed on the screen. The user will then modify the CSV and upload it back into the system again. So if we work through that and work out which of these particular items in the story require a test. First of all, we've got a user logs onto the system. That will be 1. Do they have an unprivileged account? That will be 2. He then tries to perform a search on the application. That would be 3. The result being displayed would be 4. He then wants to export the result in a CSV format. That will be 5. The CSV will match the items displayed on the screen. That could be quite a few test cases there if there's lots of information being downloaded. And then the user will modify the CSV and upload it back into the system again. That will be, again, quite a few different test cases in there depending on how many items are being edited. So system scenarios or storylines. Tom tries to perform a search for X, as we just said. Now these are usually based on state transition models, which make use of state transition diagrams to describe the system behavior. These state transition diagrams use the distinct states to define system behavior and changes. Most current modeling tools contain some kind of ability to represent state transition models. The use of a state transition model can be most easily recognized as a logic state diagram and directed graphs for finite state machines. Business verticals. A vertical market is one where businesses and marketers cater to the needs for a specific group of people in a particular industry. And now we have checklists. A checklist shouldn't really be used as the be-all and end-all of a test. Every test needs to have test cases so they can be traced back to the tester and traced back to the version of code that they're being tested against. However, it's good to have an overall checklist of items that you know need to be tested and you know you will cover. Ideally, a checklist should be written before test cases, and then you can match the test cases back to the checklist. So this is a test readiness review, which will be completed after all the test cases have been completed. So we have all the requirements finalized and analyzed. Complete. Test plan created and reviewed. Complete. Test case preparation done, which is exactly as it sounds. Has the tester created every single test case? Do they still have them sitting in an Excel sheet somewhere? If they do, they need to upload it into the test system. Test case review and sign off. This should be done by the test manager, or at least the next in line management wise from the actual test case designer. The outcome of the tests or the outcome of the coverage shouldn't be on the tester's shoulders. It should be up to the manager to verify that they've created all the tests that they need and that it's going to give a good coverage as well. Now, test data availability. Say if you are attempting to perform some tests on a directory that contains 1,000 users, you have to make sure that you have adequate test data to put in there. You would need 1,000 users to be entered. Also, what some people have a habit of doing is they say, okay, I need 1,000 users. They'll create one user, duplicate it 1,000 times. Now, that's not 1,000 users, that's one user duplicated. you need to have individual users in there to create a real world scenario. Not very easy to create sometimes, but it's worth it in the long run. Now, smoke testing. Turning it on, putting it in the environment, does it start and smoke anywhere? Sanity testing done. Now that would be the tester, or maybe even somebody outside the testing team, just having half an hour to look through the system, making sure that there's nothing glaringly obvious, make sure there's no render problems in any of the graphics, or make sure that all the buttons work, all the expected file types are what they should be for downloading, etc. Now the team have to be aware of their roles and responsibilities. The last thing you want to do is 7 days into a particular test set realise that you've had 2 guys running exactly the same tests and they didn't even know about it. It does happen. Sometimes it's intentional, i.e. the users realise what they're doing and they both want to do it to check each other's work. Or it could be completely unintentional, totally harmless. They may both pick up the same job sheet and end up working through the same test cases and wasting 7 days' work. Now, are the team aware of the deliverables expected of them? Do they know that within 7 days they have to run 250 test cases? Or more importantly, do they know how many hours they have to work per day to achieve that? They should do. Are they aware of the communication protocol as well? Now, this is talking about kind of internal team communication protocols. In my experience, it would be great if each member of your team could send you an email at the end of the day. That would just kind of outline the work that they've been doing for that day, and even give you a little kind of task list update as well to say, yesterday I had 10 items on my task list, today I've completed 2 of them, I'll be starting the 3rd one 9 o'clock in the morning when I start work. The team's access to the application, version controlling tools and test management. Obviously, it goes without saying that the team needs access to the test bench where the application is running. You have to make sure that they have the right privilege. Is the application you're running a privileged application? Do the users have to have admin or root access? Also, version controlling. You'd be surprised how many developers make changes on the fly on QA bench systems just to avoid tickets being raised. So having a good version control in there as well that would constantly check for updated versions is definitely a good idea. And of course, test management. Probably one of the most important things. Who's going to oversee the entire test? That would either be your boss or your boss's boss. They are the guys who are going to have to claim responsibility if something goes wrong. So ideally, they're going to be on your back if something does go wrong, or if something isn't going quite as well as it should be in like a time sense. Are the teams trained? Now, plenty of testers out there would think that yes, I can test anything. However, if a particular test requires you to have MySQL knowledge and they don't have that, that will definitely pose an issue. So it would be a good idea for the test manager to go through a particular project prior to any team taking it on and highlighting all the skills that will be required, such as MySQL. They need to have access to a Macintosh, they need to have access to XYZ tablets, or they need to have a working knowledge of JavaScript or something like that. If not, it's definitely possible to train or even to kind of work on a buddy system. So a tester that isn't that familiar with MySQL could sit with somebody who is very familiar with it, and then a couple of days down the line they could then take on their own checks and their own tests just to save consolidating too much effort in one area. Now, technical aspects. Server 1 refreshed or not. I know that sounds a bit vague, but to me that means is the test system set up correctly? Is it has it been updated since the last time it was used on the previous project? Who's verified that the build on there is exactly as it will be in production? As I've said previously, hopefully that will be the system administrators or the project engineer guys who will be doing that for you, or it may even be QA themselves, as long as they can define in their reports how the environment is actually set up. Now, defect reporting standards are defined. So defect reporting ideally would go through a ticketing system. usually what would happen is a QA tester would find an issue. They'd probably verify it with one of their colleagues just to make sure they weren't going crazy. And they might even get a developer involved at that stage just to say, I found this, I can't see anything in the requirements or the functionality document to say that it should be there. Is this a bug? Now, you just know that if that developer quickly runs back to his desk and starts code crunching, there's going to be a problem there. At that point, you would raise an issue. Or it may be that you've misunderstood the requirements and the developer has corrected you and he's told you exactly how it should be working. But as I say, 9 times out of 10, if you think it's a bug, it probably is. It should be reported. Not only for the good of the system, but for your own good as well. There's going to be somebody looking to see who is creating how many tickets per week, per month, etc. And it's far better to raise a ticket and have it deferred by the development team because it's a non-issue than it is to let an issue slip through the net for it to be a complete showstopper when the system goes live. Now, once this checklist is complete, the product is essentially ready to be handed over for either beta testing or release, depending on what stage you're at. The decision to do that isn't usually made by the testing team. It would be made by the project management team. But anyway, the test readiness review has to be completed. And finally, we have charters. A charter is just a vague plan, the starting point for your exploration and the specific test ideas. The mission purpose should be defined using the charter. I guess you could probably think of it as a mission statement that a lot of companies have. This is what we're about, this is what we do. Test charters on a higher level are used instead of detailed test specifications. A charter would probably be a very high level summary. Then from a charter, requirements would be written, and then from the requirements, tests would be written. So everything has to start from the initial idea, which would be a charter.